Hello everyone, how are you doing? It is Kristi, and welcome back to Why Patriarchy Ruins Everything, and it really does. There's nothing good about it. I hope you're having a good day, and yeah, let's get going. We're gonna pick up today on part 2 of where we left off last time, and to set the context for that, and hi to everyone in the chat, by the way, I do see you. It's great that you're here, thank you. Light falling over. So, we have, last time we looked at sort of a case study of values that come together to form modern American patriarchy. Now, I'm going to kind of extract those down to sort of 3 cores, although we could look at the pyramid of patriarchal oppression, which we will in more depth later. But for the moment, we're going to take a little more vague and flexible idea of what constitutes common attributes of patriarchy. And those are physical prowess, some sort of like physical domination, a lot of sexual conquests, goodbye monetization for saying the S word. Wow, this lamp just wants to keep falling over. I'm going to try to be professional and keep going, but I might just occasionally have to catch a falling light. And then the last one is in the context of modern American patriarchy, economic wealth. But I think there's a good case to be made that in the past, you would have a land or how many cows you owned or whatever else. But there was some sort of idea of you getting stuff from other people, right? You are the one profiting. You're taking from others. And this cluster of attitudes, which is contextually situated, but I think has a lot of probably coverage in terms of where the concepts would work and where they would appropriately, fit onto points in history. If that's, let's say it covers 75% of the variance in what we see in terms of what is considered masculinity in a given culture, then where did these values come from, right? Because when I think about the world that I live in, the values I hold, they came very much from the generation that educated me, who they got their values from the generation that educated them, right? And this is how we see, progress over time as people modify ideas. But thank you, Flint. I see your thank you for the 5. I appreciate that so much. These attributes, if you think going back and back and back and back, when didn't they apply? I guess maybe that's a better question. And as I think about human history, you can see that this is a pretty good model for going back in history. So then the question, I think, becomes like, okay, we've got these set of values. They're common enough to be like a social phenomenon that we need to understand in various cultures, even if it is contextually situated. And my question is kind of like, how did we get here? How do we even, get to the social aspects? And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. The main argument I'm going to make is that it's not enough to just look at human history and culture when we want to understand patriarchal power relations, that we actually have to go back to not only prehistory, but Homo sapien history. I'm going to just review a little bit about an article that looks at the evolutionary origins of patriarchy and takes a lot of our genetic cousins to and sort of systematically compares how and I'm not going to talk about identity here because we're talking about species of animals, and it's possible animals might have trans or cis brains because their brains are like our brains, right? But we don't have any way of communicating that, so I'm just going to say male female in this case. So when we have male groups and female groups in a social group, is there one common structure as a social solution they all find? Is there variation in how these power relations are constructed? What are the characteristics? Those kinds of things. Let's just look back to see what our where we came from in terms of the opportunities. And then the argument I'm going to make based on like moving forward into human history is that when it came to ancient societies and prehistoric societies, competition and survival encouraged a certain type of reaction to behaviors, and that the framework for that is very much, like you can look at people who are sociopathic and lack compassion and their willingness to do something to get power. Not just sociopaths. What I'm saying is that in terms of a population, if you have people who are sociopaths, you always have the chance that someone will do something, or someone who is sociopathic will get power and then be willing to do things that maybe other people who aren't sociopaths wouldn't be willing to do, thus forcing everyone to behave in an almost sociopathic way. And it is this coping strategy of defending against the possibility of sociopathic attacks by becoming a sociopath, at least mimicking some of those emotional characteristics, provided a survival advantage. And then the last thing I want to argue today is that the problem, okay, so that might have been a good fit 6,000 BCE, 1,000 BCE, 1 CE, maybe even like 1492 CE, but it's not a good strategy anymore. We don't need it because we're not constantly under threat from, invasion. We're not constantly gearing ourselves up to go invade some other place and steal all their things. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the world, but I'm saying that like there are places in the world where you don't have to worry about that so much, and so we don't have to keep living under this mentality. So let's do this again, but slowly. Beep, beep. Thank you, honking horn, for emphasizing my point. All right. So as I said, we looked at those characteristics, and I'm just going to, what do I have first? Do I have this first? I guess I do have this first. Nope, this is the one I need first. So let me get on the right screen now. Hey, there we are. One time in the future, I want to maybe do like a 3 or 4 part series where I go through this article properly, because it is really interesting. I'd also, because it was written, I think in like the 1980s or something, I'm going to look at there, received August 23, 1994. All right, so there might be reactions and updates to it since then. But I think the author makes a very interesting point that we should take on board. So I will just read the abstract and then I kind of, again, summarize a little bit more in depth what the article concludes. The abstract of The Evolutionary Origins of Patriarchy by Barbara Smuts reads, this article argues that the feminist analysis of patriarchy should be expanded to address evolutionary bases of male motivation to control female sexuality. Evidence from other primates of male sexual coercion and female resistance to it indicate that the sexual conflict of the species, sorry, I'm reading this on a screen that's a version of a screen that's the original screen, so I'm going to big it up a little bit because it's pretty tiny. Okay, so it says, where did I leave off here? I left off at, I could have had just Snoop read this for us, but I'm not going to do that today. All right, so evidence from other primates of male sexual coercion and female resistance to it indicates that the sexual conflicts of interest that underline patriarchy predate the emergence of the human species. Humans, however, exhibit more extensive male domination and male control of female sexuality than is shown in most other primates. 6 hypotheses are proposed to explain how, over the course of human evolution, this unusual degree of gender inequality came about. This approach emphasizes both behavioral flexibility, cross-cultural variability, and the degree of patriarchy and possibility for future change. So a TLDR on this piece is that she does go over baboons, chimps, orangutans, apes, and whatever else, and evaluates the way in which like males and females in those groups behave. Oh no, there comes Snoop. But you can't hear him because he's muted on the screen. All right. And what she finds is a great amount of variation that when it comes to males trying to use coercion versus like coaxing to get female cooperation and enthusiastic consent, that those are 2 strategies that are employed, and that different primate groups have developed different strategies, or maybe it was the conditions, or maybe it was just an accident of history that sent each one down their own way. But on the one extreme, and I don't know if I think it was bonobos, but I'd have to check to make sure. The point that she made was that for bonobos, actually the females come together in a sort of solidarity, and they protect each other from male aggressors. And they have so much influence because they are able to form this union, basically, of it's like it's a protection squad, basically against a rogue male. And if males do go rogue or something, all the women or females, sorry, the females will jump on him. And even when it comes to, I think, the alpha males, when there's power changing hands, they need to get the group of females on side, right? And so in this case, you see collective power and collective action being used to offset individual level aggression. Also in these situations, I think that it's the case that when there's mating, the female stays within her family group, her original family group. And then on the other end, the more opposite extreme, is, I can't remember the species, we're going to look at the article one day and we're going to learn, or it's available online. I'm pretty sure it's for free, so anyone can read it. But maybe it was orangutans, but anyway, they would take females from other groups and bring them over to their group, isolate them from their kin and their, sort of genetic relatives, and then not allow female solidarity within their tribes. And that was the most oppressive, most violent situation that was the opposite extreme. And so there's this link between female solidarity and community and protection, and male aggression and power negotiations. And you can see the variety, and there's a whole bunch of range of things in between. So what did we learn from this? Well, what we can conclude from this variation is that while the tendency for there to be this sort of, tension between, when you call it a pleasure resource or like a sexual resource, or like having access to a partner who's consensual, or wanting, that stuff, that tension, or not tension necessarily, but the way that drives work and whatever, the use of violence to get what you want. I'll just say it like that. That there isn't one natural model that all humanoid or primates groups adopt as their solution. If patriarchy as human beings practice it were natural, then we wouldn't see variation in other kins, because it would be the most perfect optimized social structure for a social animal like human beings and other primates are. So that's what I think we can actually, the most important point of this piece is that the structures and the forms of control and negotiation between groups over reproduction and other acts is not set. It's not given by nature. And if it's not given by nature, then it's socially constructed. So we can really rule out, obviously there are factors of, the cost of sex is far higher for the person who can get pregnant, because they have the burden of pregnancy, the risk of childbearing, then the duties of childbearing, the physical changes to your body. There's a lot of consequences for the person who is giving birth compared to the person who just drops off some seeds and might or may not stick around, not required. And those that kind of built-in disparate power, or interests and costs are built in. But that kind of, I think, is not a driver of patriarchy, because there's a lot of potential solutions to that, as we can see from nature. So if it's not natural, then it's social. So society, and we're kind of going to get, I guess, tapping a little bit into game theory here. But the next step of the premise is, all right, so we don't have a given way of organizing societies from nature. There's no genetic destiny as to how power and liberty and violence are dealt with in any particular group. But when it comes to human beings, you can use game theory. So game theory is like the prisoner's dilemma is an example of game theory. It's looking at a situation where there are multiple outcomes and you have to try to figure out which one is the best. So in the prisoner's dilemma, for instance, is game theory. Let's say you and your friend both did crimes. you got caught. They put you in different cop cars. They take you down to the station. They put you in a room and another person in a room, and they say, okay, look, if you confess and tell me everything that happened, then I'll make sure, it's a first offense. You'll probably get off with probation. But if I go to your friend and I tell you them first, oh, no, it's not probation. I'll get you like a 1 year in prison. If you confess, throw your friend under the bus, I'll give you 1 year in prison. If you sit here and decide not to do anything and your friend decides to confess, you're going to take the full weight, the 5 years, and they're going to get the 1 year. So you should really think about what's best for you. Right? So in this dilemma, you and your partner can't communicate. You're both facing 3 options. If I say nothing and my partner says nothing, we both get off scot-free. Let's just say that's a scenario. If I confess and I throw my partner under the bus, yeah, I'll go to a prison for 1 year, but by ratting them out, I only get 1 year and they get 5. So can I trust them? Because then if I am loyal to them and they're not loyal to me, I get 5 years. So game theory is a kind of looking at the different calculations that go into that. And I want to apply this to, prehistoric societies and ancient societies, basically just as human beings kind of came out of the evolution of our characteristics and we now would call the end product that we would say. This is where Homo sapien starts, and that's where the other bit kind of sort of ends. Or grays out, smudges. There's this time period where it's kind of, anyway. And we know from human history that competition for resources is an ongoing thing. There's this video I found, I might just kind of play it in the background, and this is kind of sort of deceptive. This is time lapse of every battle in history. It's every battle that was recorded by a person that survived till today. So obviously there were like way more battles that happened that were not recorded because languages didn't survive, cultures didn't survive, or whatever. But history, if you think about history of any country, it's the history of conflict. It's the history of invasion or the history of imperialism or colonialism. It's about moving into other people's territories or defending people from people who want to move into your territory. And as I said, in these situations where you have you're living with the constant threat of Vikings showing up on your doorstep, white colonialists showing up on your doorstep, any Mongols showing up on your doorstep, right? There's the Gauls showing up on the doorsteps of Rome. It's just like you can go throughout it and see that this, even though cities and states had levels of civility, right? You wouldn't call it that way. That international relations were still very much a Hobbesian state of nature. I think we talked about Hobbes, about the way the war of all against all last time, and when you live without a Leviathan, someone who can take power in order to enforce contracts and make laws have impact and dole out punishments, then what's rewarded is the worst behavior. If you have a situation where, that's your, if you are willing to do something that someone else isn't willing to do, and they capitulate because, you're going to do something like that you win. And so there is a perverse incentive structure that the more, the better, not having moral bars, not holding back is a survival equalizer. It's not even an advantage. It's just an equalizer. So we see here that human conflict is just a thing that we've always lived with. And I would say that for a privileged few countries, but it probably is like the last 2 centuries, last 200 years, where this sort of ongoing continual threat is just not a daily threat anymore. I'm not worried about Vikings coming down the Rhine. I'm not worried about Romans coming down the Rhine. I don't need to learn in a local militia how to go out and defend the city walls against invaders or whatever else, because that's just not how we live our lives. And yet, we still have this hangover. We still have these values that are designed to keep you alive in that time period. So what am I talking about here in terms of like this link with sociopathy? Well, if you want to build, sorry, if you want to build a like a moral society, um, it, it, if you're competing against someone else who will do anything, I guess this is the point of it. And I don't think that humans are ever perfectly going to ever have like a perfect society, simply because like we have design problems built in. And I would point to, and I'm not saying that every single person who is a sociopath is evil and a scourge on the earth, but they do operate within a moral framework because of nothing they can control. A lot of times for people who aren't abused into a kind of sociopathy, but people who have a brain structure where it takes more for them to get fight or flight. They just like don't connect their emotions to actions. They don't have compassion, as we'll look at. If you have that always as a possibility in your population, then you're always going to need people who or at least, like there that you have to watch out for, because we know, for instance, there are more sociopaths in sort of corporate America, and in business, because it's a situation where acting amorally can be very, very useful for a corporation. Corporations do behave like sociopaths, and that's very dangerous, which is why they need to be regulated. So my point here is that for a given society, until you get to that point where you don't have to constantly being prepared to do terrible things to protect you or your own or whatever else you believe in, that was a useful strategy. So we say sociopaths can be dangerous. They're hungry for power and don't feel guilt or remorse, but they're not inherently evil, and some are productive members of society. This is actually from a book, Confessions of a Sociopath, by a woman who is a sociopath, and she's a law professor, and an attorney, and was a Sunday school teacher. All right, so yes, sociopaths are not inherently anything. However, they do have, for instance, some common characteristics which allows us to identify and, you say, diagnose. They can be very charismatic. They don't really get nervous. They tend to fail to conform to social norms. They might come off as a little bit of an independent thinker, or they might be committing crimes, depending on who they are. They have a facility with lying. Well, they lie frequently, obviously, to cover up certain aspects of themselves or things that they would indicate that they're a sociopath. Probably the biggest characteristic of a sociopath is their lack of empathy. They can't really imagine or feel the emotional worlds of other people. It's very foreign to them, and they don't have conscience. And so, like, if that is so, like I said, so the problem, however, as I pointed out, is that while this was a useful strategy for survival for a majority of the human history, I would argue for quite a lot of people. Still going? No, I'll just let it run. That'll be my background. For a lot of people in a lot of places, we don't have to live like that anymore, and so we don't need those patriarchal values to protect our society anymore. In fact, I would argue that it is now moved on from a crappy survival management strategy to a maladaptive behavior. We're now to the point where these kinds of attitudes and behaviors, they probably always hurt. Here's the thing is, they've probably always been very toxic to mental health, emotional like fluency, and the ability to connect with other people, not to mention all of the post-traumatic stress disorders that must have come from being in battle, for survivor's guilt that people must have experienced when they came back and their friends didn't. Like domestic violence, all this stuff was happening, right? But you were surviving as a species. You were surviving as a culture or a group or a faith or whatever. And so crappy strategy, but understood. We don't need that anymore today. And so that's kind of what my argument is, that we don't, because people think of male dominance, cis heterosexual male dominance, as being natural as being part of nature. We don't necessarily question how it was constructed and where it came from and why was it constructed and is it useful for us today. And those are the questions that I wanted to answer by looking at this video. So if you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and type them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be wrapping this up in a couple minutes because I do like to keep this to less than half an hour. And very exciting, so those of you who are really happy to see Fae Queen Corey in the chat, Corey is going to be joining me in July when I get back from my holiday to talk about, I think we have a really complicated title picked out. Actually, Corey was the one who picked it out. And I've got the draft of it. It's a really catchy title. Load the draft. Oh, yes. Ads, of course. Shh. Thank you. All right. The working title is Patriarchy's Bias Influencing Academia - Matriarchy episode fill in the blank. So that's going to happen in July, and that will be a very different format. It's not going to stick to a half hour, which is why I want to do it separately. We're just going to have a chat and talk about matriarchy because it's a topic that I'm interested in, but I'm doing one thing at a time. So yeah, Corey, really can't wait to have you on, and everyone else, you can listen in July. So let me just quickly see. I'll move this over. See, I can see your comments. Now I'll just do it on this page because I don't want to have to awkwardly look. Look forward to it. The only conflict from the note. I don't see any particular questions, but I see. Oh gosh, we got a wild PZ Myers in the chat. Wow, I missed that during the show. Hi, and to Troy, good to see you as well. So, okay. PZ, I would love your thoughts on this. I'd question whether this is actually an adaptive strategy. Doesn't seem to be working out that well for us. Well, I'm going to point out, and maybe this is unfair. I did think about saying this during the show, but just like sickle cell anemia is a shitty adaptive strategy, but one against malaria. I guess I was kind of thinking of parallels there. But I would really love it, PZ, if you're still in the chat, is if you wanted to read that article, I'll reread it. I would love to have a chat with you about it and your thoughts about this sort of like looking at evolutionary theory and patriarchy and feminist critique and the nexus therein. So, but thanks. I mean, I really appreciate your comments on that. I just want to say, because, alternative hypothesis, humans are a cooperative species. Division of labor was an important element of cooperation. Patriarchy is a pathological response to a stupid... PZ, I feel a jointly authored paper coming on. I'll bring my feminism stuff, and you can bring your smart evolution, natural science stuff. A byproduct of an adaptive general response. All right, so all right. I was in the right field, but not on the right track. Yeah, I'm not on Twitter anymore because I insulted Elon Musk. But I don't. I'll see if maybe through Kevin I can get a hold of you. If you're interested, I'll find out because it would be a lot of fun. All right, I'm gonna ignore everybody else's comments except PZ's. Sorry, I saw your others first and said hi to you, but I do want to keep this to a half an hour. So. I think then, yes, I'm going to be leaving in a couple days to fly to the States. I will be back in not next week, obviously, because that would be way too short. I'm going to try to get up the weekend dates. I think 8th and 9th. 9th and 10th. No, 10th and... No, is that July? No, that's June. Hold on. Oh, yeah, PZ, you're still in the chat. Absolutely. Good. I'll figure out a way to get a hold of you. And we'll connect up. I think if you're still on Twitter, I've got a... Cis woman eat it Elon Musk is my new Twitter handle. So if you see cis woman eat it Elon Musk and then hi, it's Kristi, that'll be me. All right. Yeah, 8th and 9th. So depending on how jet lagged I am when I arrive back, I will do something new. And then probably talk to Corey maybe on the 9th that weekend or the weekend after. And Flint, stop giving me money. I know it's not like the whole point of the money thing is to get money. And I thank you so much. I appreciate it. But stop. You're too generous. All right. Oh, I just want to hug every one of you. I just want to absolutely just reach through the camera and hug every single one of you. All right. This is like the emotional high. This is what I forgot that I missed doing live streams. I knew there was a reason I liked doing them. All right, you all. Thank you. This was fantastic. I'm really looking forward to following up with PZ and exploring this a little bit more, because I really would just like to sit like this and hear your thoughts. And of course, we're going to do the same with Corey in a couple of weeks. So yay! All right. Well, with that, positive energy. Everyone, I've been Kristi. You have been awesome. Have a wonderful, fantastic, fabulous weekend, rest of the weekend or week, whenever it is, wherever it is that you are. Okay. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.